Hello everybody, my name's Colt, this is Gone Hollow Minis, and I promise there's a reason I'm dressed like this. I have always been about storytelling in my miniature painting. I want my miniatures to feel like actual soldiers and space marines. I want it to be believable that they've seen some sort of conflict or battle. However, that doesn't have to end at characters. Sometimes the way we organize and theme our armies as a whole can help to communicate a story before we even get to the tabletop. So why don't we take a look at an example of how to do just that. Today we're not only going to figure out how to assemble our own Deathcore siege regiment, but also how to portray a single unified fighting force on the tabletop. Now as we get into this, I want to clarify that I'm using the most up-to-date information that I could find. Namely, this is from White Dwarf 509, which has a whole article on how Krieg siege regiments are organized. I know for a fact that this article will have some differences to older resources, especially like Imperial armor and stuff. But the reason I'm using this article is that it's up to date with the new Krieg refresh, and in particular the new Krieg transfer sheets. So let's go ahead and start at the top. The largest force that Krieg fields is known as a siege army. This is the sum total of the Krieg forces fielded to a particular theater or engagement. Nominally, command of a siege army falls to a Lord Commander or Lord General. Sometimes this ends up being a somewhat absent role, such as Lord Commander Zhilka in the Siege of Rex. Importantly though, this probably wouldn't be held by an actual Krieg. The highest rank that a Kriegsman can traditionally obtain is that of Colonel, in honor of Colonel Yurton, who I'm sure you're already all familiar with. The Adeptus Munitorum has forced some higher ranks onto a few Kriegsmen, namely General and some other General Staff ranks, but traditionally, Colonels is about as high as it goes. But anyway, back to the unit organization. A siege army is an absolutely huge thing that wouldn't fit into any reasonably sized Warhammer tabletop, so let's keep going and get to some more reasonable numbers. A siege army is made of individual line corps. These are specialized combinations of Krieg regiments designed for a particular purpose. There are three types of line corps. The first, the regular line corps, is sort of the basic formation. It has a reasonable balance of infantry, armor, and artillery. It covers all bases but doesn't really excel at one. Assault corps include regiments that lean further into infantry and tanks. These are designed to punch holes in the enemy's defenses. They're your over-the-top stormtrooper-style formations. Bombardment corps are made up of mostly siege and bombardment regiments. Their job is to rain lead and fire upon enemy positions, dig entrenchments, and hold established defenses. But finally, this takes us to the bread and butter of a Krieg army, the regiment. Now, Krieg regiments are a fairly flexible thing, and as we saw with the different variations of a line corps, certain units can be reinforced or opted out of in order to specialize the regiment. One regiment could go lighter on the tanks and heavier on the infantry, while another could drop the tanks and include more artillery instead. Your Krieg army will probably want a decent mix of units to handle whatever your opponent throws at you, so we'll take a look at a siege regiment, the kind of standard for a Krieg regiment. A regiment is typically led by a Krieg colonel, the highest rank that a traditional Kriegsman can hold. It is also not uncommon to see an Ordo Prefectus Commissar attached to advise and oversee the colonel at this level, though most will be attached at the battalion level instead. Alongside the colonel and his retinue is the regimental command staff. This consists of the regimental standard bearer, veteran corpsmen, and regimental sergeants, as well as any specialist assets. Specialist assets could mean things such as Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests, Navis Imperialis officers, or even native Krieg engineer corps. These resources will be assigned to battalions as the colonel sees fit. A regiment is made up of several individual battalions, numbered simply as 1st Battalion, 2nd Battalion, and so on. Directly presiding over each battalion is a lieutenant colonel, accompanied by the battalion's majors. Likewise, to the regimental level, each battalion has its own command HQ, comprised of standard bearers, the sergeants that oversee each company, as well as individual assets such as engineer squads and commissars as distributed by the colonel and the regimental HQ. Each of these battalions is made of at least 4 companies, each with its own unique composition and purpose. Firstly are the infantry companies. These are led by a captain, complete with command staff and sometimes furnished with a command vehicle such as a specialized chimera or centaur. Infantry companies are comprised of between 5 to 10 platoons, each led by a lieutenant. Additionally, a lieutenant's HQ will also include a quartermaster, standard bearer, and the watchmasters of that platoon's squads. Heavy weapons teams are also attached at the platoon level and can be directed as lieutenant orders. The squads that comprise an infantry company are made of 10 men, one of whom is designated watchmaster. Notably, each infantry company will further include armored transports, typically chimeras or centaurs, as well as 2 squads of grenadiers. Armored companies are, of course, comprised of tanks and other armored vehicles. These will be overseen by a captain from within a command vehicle. Patterns of this tank can vary, but most commonly at the moment are either the Lehman Russ or Rogel Dorn. An armored company is comprised of at least 3 squadrons. Typical squadrons consist of 3 individual vehicles. However, if the resources are available, a super heavy tank may be included as well, in which case the one vehicle will count as its own squadron. Though, due to the rarity of such vehicles, that inclusion will likely be decided at the battalion level instead. Next is the artillery company, perhaps one of the most famous of Krieg's specialized companies. Like infantry companies, these are overseen by captains, often with their own command vehicles to facilitate communication across the artillery line. Artillery companies are broken up into batteries. Each battery will include 4 individual guns. The lieutenants that oversee this level of organization also have access to armored transports, centaur artillery haulers, and infantry squads to act as observers. Finally, we have the Death Rider companies. These are overseen by a squadron commander and his command squadron. After that, the company is divided into squadrons of 10 riders, each led by a ride master, the equivalent of a watchmaster or sergeant. And there we have the entire organization of a Krieg siege army, but I understand that's a lot of information, so let's go ahead and do a recap from the bottom. Infantry companies. A single infantry squad is made of 10 corpsmen, led by a watchmaster. 6 of these, plus 2 grenadier squads and a lieutenant's HQ, make up 1 platoon. 4 or more platoons, plus the captain's HQ, combine to make an infantry company. Armored companies. 3 individual tanks or 1 super heavy tank create 1 armored squadron. 3 or more armored squadrons, plus the tank commander, combine to make 1 armored company. Artillery companies. A single artillery battery is made of 4 guns, 1 observer infantry squad, and the overseeing battery lieutenant. 4 or more of these batteries combine to make an artillery company, overseen by a captain and his HQ. Death Rider companies. Death Rider squadrons are comprised of 1 ride master and 9 Death Riders. 4 or more of these squadrons combine to create 1 Death Rider company, led by a Death Rider company squadron commander and his command squadron. These combined companies can be strengthened or weakened depending on the regiment's overall needs, but typically all 4 are present in some capacity. These companies will be grouped together into a single battalion under the supervision of a lieutenant colonel. Several battalions will be organized together into a single regiment, under the command of a Krieg colonel and their command staff. So now we've got a pretty decent idea of how a siege army would actually be organized, but how do we represent that on the tabletop? Well, luckily GW has given us the tool to do exactly that, except it just kinda looks like a whole mess of numbers and symbols. You don't really get an explanation unless you track down that one White Dwarf article. Or I guess if you're watching this video. So first, we need to pick a number for our regiment. Some of these are regiments within the established lore, but really it's up to you. Pick one that rolls off your tongue or a number that you just think looks nice. It doesn't really need to be any deeper than that. Once you've picked a number, or multiple if you're going to build an entire line corps, you insane person, that number will be going on the right shoulder pad of all of our corpsmen. For your standard units, i.e. models that wouldn't be part of the command staff, the left pauldron bears the Imperialis. That's the name for the little winged skull you see everywhere in the Imperium. There are also little Aquillas in this section too, and while this White Dwarf doesn't mention them specifically, I don't see why you couldn't use them in the place of the Imperialis, maybe to distinguish different squads. Doesn't matter if you're an infantry squad, an engineer squad, or even in a command squad. If it's got a right pauldron, it gets a number. I don't have a right pauldron, so I guess I don't belong to a regiment? Your command units are a little bit different. This includes your squad's watchmasters, your veterans, tank commanders, and of course your Krieg command squads. The typical decoration for command units is a red vertical stripe on the left pauldron, with a white diamond over top and a red skull on top of that. But this article does say that different ranks are denoted by the skull of command, with various configurations of red stripe and white diamond signifying seniority of rank. Very, very helpful. So I think the specific pattern here is less important than consistency. Just make sure your watchmasters have a slightly different, less fancy pattern than, say, your command squad does. And while we're talking about infantry, these halved rhombus shapes are meant for heavy weapons teams, denoting the individual gun within the unit. But now on to the bigger models like our artillery teams and our tanks. These big rhombus shapes are regiment numbers, so they should match the number that is on our corpsmen. The only problem is that with the exception of the 310th Regiment, the pauldron numbers and the vehicle numbers are entirely different. Like seriously, the 310th is the only number that's present in these vehicle markings as well as the pauldron markings. I don't get it. It isn't too hard to color match the red paint, paint over it, and then apply your own numbers. It's just a kind of annoying step that we really shouldn't have to take. But anyway, these large regiment transfers go onto our vehicles and emplacements, so Leman Russes, Rogaldorns, and the artillery teams to name a few. For tanks, the typical placement is on the right side of the turret, while for artillery teams it's placed on the left-hand side gun shield. Now for some reason, we skip battalion markings entirely and jump to company. That's what these little colored blocks are for. Each one represents a different company by color instead of by number. The article doesn't mention if specific colors denote specific company numbers, but I just picked the ones that look best on each type of model. Just remember to keep it consistent. Keep in mind that on your tanks, company color is also denoted by painting this pattern on the front of the kinda side skirt part of the tank. This means that these colors will be a pretty big focal point on the model, so try to coordinate a bit with the rest of your color scheme. I'm planning on giving my artillery batteries the black and yellow, while the armored company will get one of the red patterns. Next are squadron or battery markings. On artillery units, this is denoted through the use of these transfers, numbers surrounded by diamonds. Remember, each battery has 4 individual guns, so if you'd like, you could give all 3 artillery teams the same number for a bit of internal coherency. Tanks, on the other hand, use these diamond patterns. The skull represents a command vehicle, though the sheet does include these options for a bit of variety. They're designed to go straight over the skull on that original transfer. Otherwise, the numbered patterns denote which squadron each tank is a part of. Now there are a lot of loose stencil font numbers on this transfer sheet that can be used for pretty much anything. However, in the spirit of being as lore compliant as possible, a lot of these numbers are meant to denote which specific gun or vehicle is present in each battery or squadron. Remember that artillery batteries are made of 4 guns and tank squadrons are made of 3 vehicles, so for artillery pick a number between 1 and 4, and for vehicles pick a number between 1 and 3. Lastly, we have a few more decorative elements. These numbers are serial numbers for your artillery teams and tanks, or really any big gun. There are also a lot of Aquillas, Imperialises, and stripes and patterns that I don't think have a specific purpose, at least as far as I know. So I'm pretty confident in saying these can be used for pretty much whatever. Other things, like these little V icons, the diamond and skull, and a lot of these colored infantry-sized skulls are meant to be honor markings, and can be little rewards for your minis for whatever they've accomplished on the tabletop or in your own lore. And of course, this section here includes transfers for basing details, trench signs, minefield warnings, and stuff like that. And there we have it, the ultimate guide to organizing your Krieg army. Just keep in mind though that the most important thing is the rule of cool, so if you think something looks cooler, go ahead and do it regardless of what I said in this video. That said, I do personally really enjoy getting into the nitty-gritty details of my army, so I'll probably be following a lot of these for my own Kriegers. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm sorry that there wasn't any painting in this one, but this article was really interesting to me, and like I said, I really like the nitty-gritty details, and it helped me figure out all the different symbols in the transfer sheet, so I hope it helps you out too. Anyways, comment to let me know how you're organizing your Krieg army. Are you going more heavy into infantry, artillery, or tanks, or doing a little bit of all 3? Feel free to like and share with your fellow Commissars, subscribe to keep up to date with all that Gonhala Minis has going on, and of course, until next time friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go holla.